The bedroom door stood open 3 inches. Just 3 inches. But through that narrow gap, Lucia Verisi watched her entire world collapse in absolute silence. Tommaso's back. Those familiar broad shoulders, the dark tattoos curling up his neck above the collar of his unbuttoned shirt, moved rhythmically in the dim light. And beneath him, fingers raking down his spine, her sister smiled. Not with passion, with triumph. Valentina's eyes found hers through that 3-inch gap, and she didn't stop. She smiled wider. Lucia's hand fell from the door handle. She didn't scream, didn't cry. Something inside her simply ended. If this story touches your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. The hallway stretched before her like a tunnel, and Lucia walked through it without feeling her legs move. Her hand found the wall for balance, her engagement ring catching the light from the window at the end of the corridor. 3 carats. He'd placed it on her finger 6 months ago, in front of his entire family, with words about forever and loyalty and love that would never break. The Silvestri family had applauded. Her own mother had wept with joy. Now that ring felt like a shackle. She reached the stairs and paused, her hand gripping the banister until her knuckles went white. Behind her, she could still hear them. The sounds drifted through the open door, her sister's theatrical moans, the creak of the bed that Lucia had helped Tommaso choose. The bed where he'd held her just 3 nights ago, whispering promises against her hair, while his tattooed fingers traced patterns on her bare shoulder. 3 nights ago. She descended the stairs with mechanical precision, each step bringing her closer to a decision that had already been made without her conscious permission. The foyer of the Silvestri estate gleamed with marble and old money, crystal chandeliers casting fractured light across portraits of generations of dangerous men. Tommaso's grandfather watched her from a gilded frame, the same cold eyes, the same sharp jaw, the same capacity for destruction hidden behind a veneer of civilized restraint. Her purse sat on the entrance table where she dropped it 20 minutes ago, rushing home early from her sister's apartment because Valentina hadn't answered her calls and Lucia had been worried. Worried. The irony burned like acid in her throat. She picked up the purse, checked for her wallet, her keys, her phone. The phone showed 3 missed calls from Tommaso's office earlier that afternoon and a text message from Valentina sent 2 hours ago. Running late for dinner. Don't wait up. Lucia stared at those words until they blurred. Then she walked out the front door, past the guards who nodded respectfully, past the fountain where Tommaso had kissed her the first time, past the iron gates that had always felt protective and now felt like the bars of a prison she'd willingly entered. She didn't look back. The city swallowed her within minutes. Rome's ancient streets twisting and turning, carrying her away from the life she'd thought she understood. She walked for hours, her heels clicking against cobblestones, her designer dress drawing curious glances from late-night pedestrians. When her feet began to bleed, she bought cheap sandals from a 24-hour pharmacy. When her phone rang for the 15th time, Tommaso's name flashing on the screen, she dropped it into a garbage can without breaking stride. By dawn, she was at the train station. By noon, she was in Florence. By the end of the week, she had crossed 4 borders and disappeared into a life Tommaso Silvestri would never find. Tommaso didn't realize she was gone until morning. He woke to cold sheets and silence, his hand reaching automatically for the warm body that should have been beside him. Finding nothing, his eyes opened slowly, adjusting to the gray light filtering through the curtains, and for a moment, he simply lay there, waiting for the sound of Lucia in the bathroom, the smell of the coffee she always made before he woke. Nothing. He sat up, running a hand through his disheveled hair, and that's when he noticed the ring. It sat on his nightstand, catching the light, placed precisely in the center of a folded piece of paper. His heart stopped, actually stopped. He could feel the absence of its beating, the sudden vacuum in his chest that made breathing impossible. The paper contained 2 words in Lucia's elegant handwriting. I saw. Tommaso read those words 7 times before their meaning penetrated the fog of confusion clouding his mind. I saw what? He looked around the bedroom, searching for context, for explanation, and his gaze fell on the tangled sheets beside him, on the impression of another body, on the long dark hair caught in his pillowcase, hair that was too dark, too straight to belong to Lucia. The memory crashed through him like a physical blow. Valentina. He'd been drinking, celebrating a successful negotiation with the Calabrese family that had secured 3 new shipping routes for the syndicate. She'd arrived unexpectedly, all sympathy and concern because Lucia mentioned you've been stressed. She'd poured him another drink, and another, and somewhere between the 4th glass and the 5th, she'd pressed against him, whispering things that made his intoxicated mind blur the distinction between the woman he loved and the one who looked so much like her. He was going to be sick. Tommaso made it to the bathroom just in time, emptying his stomach violently into the marble sink. When he straightened, gripping the counter for support, his reflection stared back at him with hollow eyes. The tattoos on his neck, Italian script spelling out famiglia, honor, sang, seemed to mock him now. Family, honor, blood. He'd betrayed all 3 in one moment of alcohol-fueled weakness. But no, that wasn't entirely true, was it? Some part of him, some dark corner he'd never examined too closely, had wanted it. Had enjoyed the forbidden thrill, the conquest, the power of taking something that wasn't his to take. Valentina had always watched him with hungry eyes, and he'd known. He'd always known. He just hadn't cared enough to protect Lucia from her sister's ambition. Until now. His phone was already in his hand, dialing her number, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried again, and again, and again. 15 calls before the automated message informed him that the number was no longer in service. No. The word came out as a whisper, then a growl, then a roar that echoed off the bathroom walls. No, no, and oh. He was dressed and in his car within minutes. His driver startled by the sudden appearance of his boss in yesterday's clothes with wild eyes and clenched fists. Find her, Tommaso snarled. Every airport, every train station, every bus terminal. Find her now. They didn't find her. The following weeks existed in a blur of obsessive searching and growing desperation. Tommaso deployed every resource at his disposal. His network of informants, his contacts in law enforcement, his alliances with families across Europe. He hired private investigators, bribed officials, called in favors from men who owed him blood debts. He personally visited every property Lucia had ever mentioned, every restaurant where she'd smiled at him across a candlelit table, every boutique where she'd tried on dresses while he watched with barely concealed hunger. Nothing. She had vanished as completely as if she'd never existed at all. On the 23rd day of his search, Tommaso received a visitor he hadn't expected. Valentina Verisi, standing in his office doorway with artfully smudged mascara and a trembling lower lip. I know you're upset with me, she began, her voice pitched to sound fragile. But I was drunk too, Tommaso. It was a mistake. We were both. Get out. The flatness of his tone stopped her mid-sentence. She blinked, recalibrating, trying to find the angle that would work on him now. I just want to help find Lucia. She's my sister. I love her. Maybe if I talked to your men, gave them information about places she might. I said get out. Tommaso didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The temperature in the room dropped by several degrees, and something shifted in his eyes that made Valentina take an involuntary step backward. She'd seen him conduct business. She'd watched him order men's executions with less emotion than he showed when choosing wine. But she'd never had that coldness directed at her before. I'm trying to help, she whispered. You're trying to position yourself. He stood slowly, his movements deliberately controlled, and walked around his desk until barely 3 feet separated them. The tattoos on his forearms flexed as he crossed his arms. Serpents and saints intertwined with dates and names that represented debts paid in blood. You've wanted my ring on your finger since the day I met your sister. You couldn't seduce me sober, so you waited until I was vulnerable. You calculated every step of that night, and now you're calculating again. But here's what you failed to account for. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I loved her. Not you. Never you. And when I find her, and I will find her, I will spend the rest of my life making her understand that what happened was the greatest mistake I've ever made. That I would tear down everything I've built, destroy everything I've become, to earn back even a fraction of her trust. And you. He straightened, his expression settling into something far more terrifying than anger. Complete indifference. You will cease to exist in my world. Your name will not be spoken in my presence. Any business your family has with mine will be conducted through intermediaries. And if I ever discover that you've interfered with my search for Lucia in any way, if I find out you've hidden information or misdirected my people or done anything to keep her from me, I will forget that you're a woman. I will forget that you're her blood. And I will deal with you as I deal with anyone who takes something from me. Valentina's face had gone white. You can't, my father has connections with the Calabrese family. If you threaten me, then let them come. Tommaso returned to his desk, effectively dismissing her. I've been looking for something to destroy. Your father's connections would be a good start. She fled. He didn't watch her go. The months crawled past like wounded animals, each day bringing new leads that dissolved into dead ends. Lucia had been smart, terrifyingly smart. She'd withdrawn cash from multiple ATMs before discarding her cards. She'd purchased tickets to 4 different destinations on the same day, boarding none of those trains. She'd changed her appearance twice in the first week, according to security footage his hackers eventually uncovered. First cutting her beautiful long hair to shoulder length, then dyeing it from dark brown to auburn. She'd learned to disappear from watching him hide things for years. The irony was not lost on Tommaso. He maintained his business operations with ruthless efficiency, but something fundamental had changed in him. His men noticed it first, the way he no longer celebrated victories, the way his rare smiles had vanished entirely, the way his already legendary patience had transformed into something colder and more unpredictable. Deals that would have once excited him now drew nothing but flat acknowledgement. Enemies who challenged him were dealt with so efficiently that word spread throughout the underworld. Tommaso Silvestri had lost whatever tempering force had once made him reasonable. He became more dangerous in his emptiness than he'd ever been in his ambition. His right-hand man, Marco, was the only one brave enough to approach him directly about it. 6 months after Lucia's disappearance, he found Tommaso on the balcony of the estate, staring at the fountain where everything had once seemed possible. Boss! Marco stood beside him, not quite close enough to intrude. The men are talking. Let them talk. They're saying you've gone cold, that you don't care about the business anymore. Tommaso's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. They're saying maybe it's time for new leadership, that the Calabrese family has been making moves while you've been distracted. Then identify who's talking and remove them. The words came out without inflection. Replace them with men who understand that my personal affairs don't affect my ability to protect what's mine. Marco hesitated. And what about finding her? The investigation continues. Tommaso's hands gripped the balcony railing, his knuckle tattoos, single letters spelling Vita and Mort across both sets of fingers, standing out stark against the pale marble. Life and death, the two absolutes that had governed his world for as long as he could remember. But now there was a third, Lucia. Every lead, no matter how small, every whisper of a woman matching her description. I want to know. It's been 6 months, boss. Maybe she doesn't want to be found. The sound Tommaso made wasn't quite a laugh. Of course she doesn't want to be found. I destroyed her trust. I broke something sacred. But that doesn't change the fact that she belongs with me. It doesn't change the fact that I will spend the rest of my life trying to fix what I broke. He turned to face Marco, and the intensity in his eyes made the other man step back. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect her to love me again. But I need her to understand that it will never happen again. That she is the only woman who has ever mattered. That I will burn down the entire world to prove it if necessary. Marco nodded slowly. And if she's moved on? Started a new life? The question hung between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to examine too closely. Then I will watch from a distance, Tommaso said quietly. I will ensure her safety, her happiness, her protection, all without her knowledge. I will love her from the shadows for the rest of my life if that's what she needs. He paused, something vulnerable flickering across his features, before he locked it away again. But I will never stop looking. I will never stop trying to find her. That much at least she deserves to know. What Tommaso didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that 3 weeks after her disappearance, curled in the bathroom of a cheap hostel in Lisbon, Lucia had discovered she was pregnant. The test had shown 2 lines, stark and undeniable, and she'd sat on that cold tile floor for 3 hours, crying until she had no tears left. Part of her had wanted to call him then. Part of her had reached for the burner phone she'd purchased at a market, ready to dial the number she still knew by heart. But every time her fingers touched the screen, she saw her sister's triumphant smile. She saw his back, his shoulders, his tattoos moving in the dim light while another woman gasped beneath him. She couldn't go back. Not even for this. The pregnancy progressed with complications that terrified her. Severe morning sickness that lasted well into her 2nd trimester. Blood pressure spikes that sent her to emergency rooms in 3 different countries. Weight loss that made doctors frown with concern. She was alone. Completely, utterly alone. Her mother was a ghost of a woman who'd never protected her from Valentina's manipulations. Her father had died when she was 12, and every friend she'd made in Rome had been connected to Tommaso's world in some way. She couldn't trust any of them, so she trusted strangers. The elderly woman in Barcelona who noticed her crying in a cafe and offered a spare room in exchange for light housekeeping. The nurse in Madrid who slipped her extra prenatal vitamins when the clinic supply ran low. The midwife in Toulouse who held her hand through 27 hours of labor and never once asked about the father. The twins came early, at 36 weeks, in a small hospital near the French countryside. 2 boys, perfect and screaming and absolutely his. Lucia took one look at their dark hair, their sharp little features, and sobbed with a grief that confused the nurses. They thought she was overwhelmed with joy. They brought her flowers and chocolates and cooed over the beautiful babies. They didn't understand that every time she looked at her sons, she saw the man she loved, the man she hated, the man she could never escape. She named them Leonardo and Matteo, Leo and Matt, names that didn't belong to anyone in either family, names that were theirs alone. And then she ran again. The years passed differently for each of them. For Lucia, time became measured in milestones. First words, Leo said mama at 11 months. Matt said more while reaching for applesauce at 13 months. First steps, Matt walking before he could crawl properly, Leo content to observe until he could do it perfectly. First day of school, both of them crying, though Leo tried to hide it while Matt clung to her leg with spectacular drama. She'd settled eventually in a small coastal town in Portugal. Far enough from Italy to feel safe, warm enough for the boys to play outside year-round, affordable enough on the income she earned translating documents for a local law firm. The attorneys there knew her as Lucia Marquez, a widow with twin sons and a quiet smile that never quite reached her eyes. They didn't ask questions about her past, and she didn't volunteer information. It was a small life, a quiet life, a safe life. But at night, after the boys were asleep and the house fell silent, she allowed herself to remember. The way he'd looked at her across crowded rooms, the weight of his arm around her waist, the rumble of his voice against her ear when he whispered things meant only for her. She'd loved him with everything she had. She still did. The realization made her angry. At him, at herself, at the stubborn heart that refused to let go no matter how many times she commanded it to stop. 5 years. She'd been gone 5 years, and still she woke from dreams of his touch with tears on her cheeks and an ache in her chest that no amount of time seemed to heal. The boys didn't ask about their father often, but when they did, Lucia kept her answers carefully vague. He was very important. He had important work that took him away. He would have loved you so much if he'd known about you. Half-truths that tasted like ash on her tongue. Because the full truth, that their father was one of the most powerful and dangerous men in Europe, that he'd betrayed her in the cruelest possible way, that she'd fled rather than watch him twist her heart any further, was too heavy for small shoulders to carry. Matt, predictably, accepted the vague answers and moved on to more pressing concerns. Dinosaurs, mostly, and whether chocolate could be considered a breakfast food. But Leo had his father's eyes. That same penetrating gaze that seemed to see straight through comfortable lies to the complicated truth beneath. "You're sad sometimes," he said one evening, watching her from across the dinner table with uncomfortable intensity. "When you think we're not looking, you get sad." Lucia's hands stilled on the vegetables she was cutting. "Everyone gets sad sometimes, tesoro. But your sad is different." He frowned, clearly struggling to articulate something just beyond his 5-year-old vocabulary. It's like part of you is somewhere else. Somewhere we can't go. She set down the knife, walked around the table, knelt beside his chair and pulled him into a hug that was probably too tight but which he tolerated without complaint. I'm exactly where I want to be, she whispered against his hair. Dark like his father's, thick and impossible to tame. Right here with you and your brother. You are my whole world. Both of you. Everything I do is for you. Leo hugged her back, his small arms surprisingly strong. I know, Mama, but maybe. He pulled back, that serious gaze finding hers. Maybe you could let us be there for you too? When you're sad, you always take care of us. Maybe we could take care of you sometimes. Lucia's heart cracked open. She held him tighter and let herself cry, just a little, while her wise beyond his years son patted her back with clumsy comfort. And in the other room, she heard Matt abandon whatever he was building with blocks to come investigate the emotional disturbance. Who made Mama cry? He demanded, bursting into the kitchen with the righteous fury of a small warrior ready for battle. I'll fight them, despite everything. Despite the grief and the fear and the loneliness that never quite went away. Lucia laughed. These boys, her boys, they were worth every sacrifice. On the other side of Europe, Tommaso Silvestri had become something approaching legendary. The Silvestri syndicate had expanded under his leadership, absorbing 3 rival families and establishing partnerships with criminal organizations across 12 countries. His name was spoken in whispers, a boogeyman for business competitors, a god for those who'd earned his favor. He'd become richer, more powerful, more feared than any Silvestri before him. He'd also become utterly empty. The search for Lucia had never stopped, but it had transformed from frantic desperation into something more methodical, more patient. He employed a dedicated team of investigators whose sole purpose was to track potential sightings, analyze patterns, follow threads that might lead to her. Every few months, one of them would come to him with a new possibility. A woman matching her description spotted in Prague, in Dublin, in Sao Paulo, and he would feel that familiar surge of hope before the inevitable disappointment crashed down. It was never her. He'd stopped taking lovers after the first year. The mere thought of touching another woman made his stomach turn, every potential partner's face morphing into Lucia's, or worse, into Valentina's triumphant smile. He channeled the energy that might have gone into physical release toward violence instead, handling interrogations personally that he once would have delegated, finding something almost meditative in the methodical brutality. His men thought he was punishing himself. They weren't entirely wrong. Marco remained by his side through all of it. The dark moods, the explosive rages, the long silences that stretched for days. He'd watched his boss deteriorate and rebuild himself into something harder, colder, more efficient. He'd also watched him spend hours in the empty room that had once been intended as a nursery, back when Tommaso had been planning a future that included children with Lucia's eyes and his determination. There's something you should see. Marco's voice pulled Tommaso from the report he'd been reading. Shipping manifests, nothing interesting. He looked up to find his right-hand man holding a tablet with an expression that was carefully, deliberately neutral. What is it? A new lead, but it's different. Marco set the tablet on the desk. The facial recognition software we've been running through European databases got a hit. Small town in Portugal. Woman named Lucia Marquez. Registered as a translator with a local law firm 3 years ago. Tommaso's hand moved toward the tablet, then stopped. He'd been disappointed too many times to allow himself hope. How confident is the match? 94%. Marco paused. But that's not what makes this one different. Then what does? She has children. Twin boys. 5 years old. The world stopped. Tommaso heard the words, but they refused to assemble into meaning. Children. Twins. 5 years old. 5 years, exactly how long she'd been gone. His mind performed calculations he didn't consciously initiate, reaching conclusions that made his hands shake as he finally grabbed the tablet and stared at the surveillance photo on the screen. It was her. Older now, thinner, her hair longer and streaked with premature gray at the temples. But it was her. That gentle curve of her jaw, those expressive eyes. that mouth he'd kissed 1,000 times and dreamed about every night since she'd left. And beside her, each holding one of her hands, two small boys looked up at her with adoring smiles. They had his face, his eyes, his hair, his stubborn jawline already emerging from the softness of childhood. They were his. The tablet cracked in his grip before Marco carefully extracted it from his white-knuckled hands. "Boss!" Marco's voice came from very far away. "Boss, what do you want me to do?" Tommaso couldn't speak, couldn't think. 5 years. She'd been pregnant when she left. She'd discovered it alone, carried them alone, raised them alone. All because of what he'd done. All because of one night of alcohol and weakness and betrayal that had cost him everything. He had sons. He had sons, and he'd missed their first words, their first steps, their first day of school. He'd missed birthdays and holidays and scraped knees and bedtime stories. He'd missed 5 years of watching them grow, of earning their trust, of being the father he'd always imagined becoming with Lucia by his side. 5 years. When he finally found his voice, it came out broken, barely recognizable as his own. Prepare the plane. The coastal town of Cascais glittered in the Portuguese sun. All white buildings and blue water, and an easy charm that felt 1,000 miles from the violence of Tommaso's world. He'd arrived 3 days ago but hadn't approached yet, choosing instead to watch, to learn, to try to understand the life Lucia had built in his absence. She walked the boys to school every morning at 8:15, stopping at a small cafe for coffee and pastries that she let them choose. She worked until 3, then picked them up and took them to the beach, where they built sandcastles and chased waves while she sat on a blanket and watched with the sort of tender attention that made his chest ache. In the evenings, she cooked dinner while the boys did homework at the kitchen table. He could see them through the windows of her modest apartment. 3 silhouettes in warm light, a family complete without him. She was happy. The realization was agonizing. On the 4th day, Tommaso's surveillance was interrupted by a development that made his blood run cold. A car he recognized, sleek, black, expensive, had appeared on the narrow streets of Cascais. It belonged to the Calabrese family, and its presence here could mean only one thing. Someone else had found her. He was moving before the conscious decision formed, his driver abandoning stealth in favor of speed as they raced toward the small apartment near the water. By the time they arrived, 2 men in dark suits were already approaching Lucia's door. Tommaso was out of the car before it fully stopped, his hand inside his jacket, his voice carrying across the quiet street with unmistakable authority. "Step away from that door." The men turned. Recognition flickered across their faces. Everyone in their world knew Tommaso Silvestri, followed quickly by calculation. They were Calabrese soldiers, mid-level at best, clearly not expecting to encounter someone of his status on a routine assignment. "Don Silvestri." The taller one inclined his head with forced respect. "We didn't know you had business here." "My business here is not your concern." Tommaso moved closer, and the men tracked his approach with growing unease. His tattoos were visible beneath the rolled sleeves of his shirt. Serpents and saints, dates and names. A visual history of violence that served as warning to anyone who knew how to read it. "What is your business?" "The woman. Our Don has interest in her." "What kind of interest?" The soldiers exchanged glances. "Leverage. Word is she's connected to you. Was connected. Our Don thinks she might be useful in upcoming negotiations." The temperature seemed to drop despite the warm Portuguese sun. Tommaso's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes that made both men take involuntary steps backward. "Let me be very clear," he said softly. "This woman and her children are under my protection. They have always been under my protection, even when I didn't know where they were. Anyone who threatens them, anyone who even looks at them with harmful intent, will answer to me personally. And I promise you, gentlemen, you do not want that. We're just following orders. Then go back to your Don and give him new orders." Tommaso's hand emerged from his jacket, not holding a weapon but somehow more threatening for its emptiness. "Tell him Tommaso Silvestri claims this family as his own. Tell him any move against them will be considered a declaration of war. And tell him," his voice dropped further, barely above a whisper, Tell him I've been looking for something to destroy for 5 years. I would welcome the excuse. The men retreated. Quickly. Tommaso watched them go, then turned toward the apartment door, and found Lucia standing in the entrance, the boys partially hidden behind her legs, staring at him with an expression of absolute horror. No. The word came out cracked, broken. No, no, no. You can't be here. You can't. How did you? Lucia. His voice was gentle now, all the violence drained out of it, replaced by a desperation he couldn't hide. I'm not here to hurt you. I would never. Get away from us. She was shaking, her body positioning itself to shield the children. I don't care who you are or what power you have. If you come near my sons, our sons. The words hung between them, heavy and undeniable. Behind Lucia, two small faces peered at him with expressions of confusion and dawning curiosity. They didn't know him. They had no reason to trust him. But they had his eyes, his stubborn jaw, his restless energy barely contained in small bodies. They were his. Mama! Matt's voice piped up, high and uncertain. Who is that man? Lucia's face crumpled. She pulled herself together with visible effort, but Tommaso could see the tears she was fighting back. Go inside, Tesoros. Mama needs to talk to this person. Stay with Mrs. Oliveira next door until I come get you. But, now please. The boys retreated reluctantly, casting curious glances over their shoulders. When they were gone, when the apartment door had closed behind them, Lucia turned back to Tommaso with something approaching fury. You have no right to call them that. They're my blood. Blood doesn't make a father. Her voice shook with 5 years of suppressed anger. Presence makes a father. Protection makes a father. Being there when they're sick, when they're scared, when they need someone to show them how to be brave, that makes a father. And you? You were busy betraying me with my sister while I was planning our wedding. The words hit him like physical blows. He absorbed them without flinching, knowing he deserved every syllable and more. I know. His voice was quiet, broken. I know what I did. I know what I cost us. I've spent 5 years living with that knowledge, and I can promise you, Lucia, there is no punishment you could devise that would hurt more than what I've already done to myself. I don't care about your suffering. She wrapped her arms around herself, creating a barrier between them. I care about my children, my sons, the ones I raised alone, in strange countries, with no money and no support and no one to help me when I was terrified I was doing everything wrong. Let me help now. He took a step closer and she immediately stepped back. He froze. Please. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not asking for you to love me again. But those boys are boys, they deserve to know their father. They deserve the protection I can offer, the resources, the violence, the danger. She laughed bitterly. I left to protect them from exactly this. From your world, your enemies, She gestured at him, at the tattoos and the expensive clothes and the barely contained power he radiated. From everything you are. My enemies found you anyway. He kept his voice gentle, though the words carried weight. The men at your door just now, they were Calabrese soldiers. They came here to take you, to use you as leverage against me. If I hadn't arrived when I did. Her face went pale. That's because of you. They found us because of you. No. He shook his head slowly. They found you because someone talked. Because after 5 years of searching, my investigation finally got close enough that others noticed. The Calabrese family has been looking for weaknesses in my organization, and they discovered. He paused, the words painful. They discovered that I've never stopped looking for you. That finding you has been my obsession since the morning you left. They thought they could use that against me. So what now? Her voice was hollow. I run again? I take my sons somewhere else? Start over somewhere new? Spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder? No. Tommaso's jaw tightened. Now you let me protect you. Properly. The way I should have protected you 5 years ago. I don't want your protection. You may not want it. But you need it. He held up a hand when she started to argue. I'm not saying you have to forgive me. I'm not saying you have to trust me. But the Calabrese family knows about you now, and they won't stop just because I warned off 2 soldiers. They'll send more. They'll get creative. Then what do you propose? The anger in her voice was cracking, revealing the fear beneath. I become your prisoner? Live in your compound surrounded by guards, watching my sons grow up in the same world that made you into. Into what? His voice was soft, dangerous. Say it. Into what, Lucia? The tears finally spilled over, tracking down her cheeks like liquid grief. Into someone who would do what you did. Who would take my heart and break it so completely that 5 years later, I still wake up crying and I hate myself for it because I should be over you. I should have moved on. But I can't. I can't stop. He was moving before he could stop himself, crossing the distance between them and pulling her into his arms. She fought at first, her fists beating against his chest, her voice muffled against his shirt as she called him names he probably deserved. But then she stopped. Her hands gripped the fabric of his jacket, and she sobbed deep, racking sobs that had been building for 5 years, finally finding release in the arms of the man who had caused them. I'm sorry. He whispered the words into her hair, his own voice rough with emotion. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. I would take it back if I could. I would cut out my own heart if it would undo what I did to you. You can't undo it. Her voice was muffled against his chest. You can never undo it. I know. His arms tightened around her, his tattooed hands spreading across her back with desperate tenderness. But I can spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. I can prove to you, every single day, that I will never betray you again. That you are the only woman I want. The only woman I will ever want. For as long as I live. She pulled back, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes. Why should I believe you? You shouldn't. The honesty in his voice surprised them both. Not yet. Not until I've earned it. But give me the chance to earn it, Lucia. Let me be in their lives. Let me protect all of you. And maybe, eventually. He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Maybe eventually what? Her voice was barely a whisper. Maybe eventually you'll let me love you again. The way I should have loved you all along. The way I've loved you every day since you left. Even when I didn't know where you were. Even when I thought I might never see you again. The silence stretched between them, heavy with history and pain and the faintest, most fragile thread of hope. And in the apartment nearby, 2 small faces watched through a gap in the curtains, trying to understand why the tall man with the dark eyes had made their mother cry, and why she was letting him hold her anyway. The days that followed existed in a strange limbo, suspended between the life Lucia had built and the one Tommaso was trying to offer. He'd taken a suite at a hotel overlooking the water, close enough to respond if trouble came, far enough to give her the space she'd demanded. His men patrolled the streets in unmarked cars, their presence invisible to anyone who didn't know what to look for. But Lucia knew. She felt him everywhere now, in the shadows that moved too purposefully, in the strangers who lingered just a moment too long at the cafe where she bought coffee, in the quiet certainty that she would never truly be alone again. Part of her hated it. Part of her, the treacherous, foolish part that still loved him despite everything, found herself sleeping more soundly than she had in years. The boys noticed the change immediately. Mama's not looking over her shoulder anymore, Leo observed one morning, his voice thoughtful in that way that always made him seem older than his 5 years. She used to do it all the time, at the market, at the beach, when we walked to school. But now she doesn't. Matt looked up from his breakfast, a smear of jam across his cheek. Maybe she's not scared anymore. Maybe. Leo's dark eyes, so much like his father's, held a wisdom that made Lucia's heart ache. Or maybe someone else is doing the watching for her. She set down her coffee cup, trying to keep her expression neutral. What makes you say that, Tesoro? I see them sometimes. Men in nice clothes who pretend to be looking at things but are really looking at us. He shrugged with studied casualness. They're not very good at pretending. Lucia suppressed a bitter laugh. Tommaso's soldiers, trained to surveil without detection, outmaneuvered by a 5-year-old who'd inherited his father's observational skills. She made a mental note to mention it to Tommaso, then caught herself, disturbed by how naturally the thought had come. She wasn't supposed to be coordinating with him. She wasn't supposed to be thinking of him at all. The men are there to keep us safe, she said carefully. There are some complicated things happening right now. Adult things. But I promise you, nothing bad is going to happen to either of you. Matt accepted this with the easy trust of childhood, returning to his jam-covered toast. But Leo continued to watch her with those penetrating eyes. Is it because of the man? He asked quietly. The one who made you cry? The one you let hold you? The question hit her like a physical blow. She'd known the boys had seen, had noticed the way they'd watched through the window that first day, but she'd hoped they might not remember, that they might let it go unexamined, the way children often did with things that confused them. But Leo was not most children. Yes, she admitted, because lying to him felt impossible. It's because of him. Who is he? The words sat on her tongue, heavy and terrifying. She'd planned for this moment, had rehearsed gentle explanations and careful revelations 1,000 times in her mind, but now that it had arrived, she found herself completely unprepared. She took a breath. He's someone I knew a long time ago, someone who hurt me very badly, but who's trying to make things right now. Is he sorry? For hurting you? I think so. Yes. Then why don't you forgive him? The simplicity of the question, the pure, uncomplicated logic of childhood, made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. Why didn't she forgive him? Because forgiveness felt like surrender. Because opening her heart to him again meant risking everything she'd built in his absence. Because some wounds went too deep to heal with apologies, no matter how sincere. It's complicated, Tesoro. Leo nodded slowly, as if he'd expected that answer. Adults always say that when they don't want to explain things. Sometimes it really is complicated. Or sometimes, he said, with the devastating perceptiveness that made him so much his father's son. Adults are just scared, like us. They just hide it better. Before she could respond, a knock came at the door. 3 sharp raps that made her spine stiffen with instinctive alarm. She was halfway to the kitchen, reaching for the knife block, when a familiar voice called through the wood. It's me, Lucia. Just me. Tommaso. She closed her eyes briefly, composing herself, then crossed to the door and opened it just wide enough to see him. He stood in the hallway, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him. Dark jeans, a simple button-down with sleeves rolled to reveal those haunting forearm tattoos, and holding a paper bag that smelled of fresh pastries. I brought breakfast, he said, from the bakery on the corner. The woman there says these are the boys' favorites. You've been asking about my children. I've been learning about my children. His voice held no apology. I have 5 years to catch up on. I intend to use every resource available to me. She should have been angry. She should have slammed the door in his face and told him to stay away, that his surveillance and his soldiers and his overwhelming presence were suffocating her. But behind her, she heard Matt's excited whisper, Mama, are those pasties de nata? And found herself stepping aside to let Tommaso enter. He moved into the apartment with careful reverence, his eyes taking in every detail, the modest furniture she'd purchased secondhand, the boys' artwork covering the refrigerator, the small shelf of well-worn books she'd accumulated over years of rebuilding. This was not the life she would have had with him. No marble floors or crystal chandeliers, no designer clothes or household staff, just a simple apartment in a small town, filled with evidence of the family she'd raised alone. His jaw tightened with barely suppressed emotion. You did well, he said quietly. With them. With everything. I didn't have a choice. You had a choice. He set the pastry bag on the kitchen counter, then turned to face her. You could have come back to me when you discovered the pregnancy. You could have used our children as leverage, demanded support, forced me to provide for you. Instead you chose to do this alone, with nothing, because your pride wouldn't let you accept anything from the man who'd betrayed you. Something like admiration flickered in his dark eyes. That took strength I'm not sure I would have had. It wasn't about pride. She crossed her arms, creating distance even as the small kitchen pushed them close together. It was about protection. I couldn't let them grow up in your world. I couldn't let them become like me. The words hung between them, sharp-edged and painful. Yes, she admitted. Like you. Tommaso nodded slowly, accepting the judgment without visible reaction. But his hands, Those tattooed hands that had held her so tenderly, that had also ordered violence she didn't want to imagine, curled briefly into fists at his sides. I understand. His voice was controlled, measured. But you should know something, Lucia. Whether they grow up in my world or yours, they are my sons. They carry my blood, my name, my legacy. That makes them targets, regardless of how far you run or how carefully you hide. The Calabrese family proved that. Others will follow. So what are you suggesting? That I bring them into your world voluntarily? That I let them be raised by their father? He stepped closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. By a man who would die before he let anything happen to them. Who would burn down every criminal organization in Europe to keep them safe. His eyes held hers, intense and unwavering. I'm not asking you to trust me with your heart again, but trust me with their safety. That, at least, I can promise to protect. Before she could respond, a small voice interrupted from the doorway. Are you our father? They both turned to find Leo standing at the kitchen entrance, Matt hovering uncertainly behind him. Leo's expression was calm, almost clinical, as if he'd been assembling puzzle pieces for years and had finally found the one that completed the picture. Lucia's heart stopped. Leo, he looks like us, Leo continued, undeterred. Like us and like the men in the old paintings Mama has hidden in her closet. The ones she thinks we don't know about. Tommaso's sharp intake of breath was almost inaudible. Paintings. Lucia felt heat rise to her cheeks. Among the few possessions she'd carried from one country to the next were a handful of photographs. Tommaso in various poses at various events, captured before everything fell apart. She told herself she kept them for the boys. Evidence of where they came from. But some nights, alone in the dark, she'd pulled them out and studied his face with a longing she could never fully suppress. Leo had found them. Of course he had. Yes, Tommaso said. His voice rough with emotion he was struggling to contain. I'm your father. Matt's eyes went wide. Leo simply nodded, as if the confirmation merely verified what he'd already deduced. Why did you leave? Matt asked, his voice small and confused. Mama said you had important work. But if you're here now, why weren't you here before? Tommaso knelt slowly, bringing himself to eye level with his sons. The movement was deliberate, almost reverent, as if he was approaching something sacred. This close, the resemblance was undeniable. The same stubborn jaw, the same intense eyes, the same barely contained energy. I didn't know about you, he said quietly. Your mother left before she knew you were coming, and she didn't tell me. She had good reasons for that. Reasons that were my fault, not hers. I made a very bad mistake, and I hurt her, and she was right to leave. What mistake? Leo asked. Tommaso's eyes flickered to Lucia, seeking permission or perhaps forgiveness. She gave him nothing, her expression unreadable. I broke a promise, he finally said. The most important promise a man can make to a woman. And it cost me everything. Your mother, you, 5 years I can never get back. His voice cracked slightly on the last words. But I'm here now. And if you'll let me, I'd like to try to be your father. I know I haven't earned it. I know you don't know me. But I love you already. Both of you. More than I knew it was possible to love anyone. Matt was the first to move, crossing the kitchen with the impulsive trust of childhood and throwing his arms around Tommaso's neck. I wanted a papa, he said, his voice muffled against Tommaso's shoulder. All my friends have papas. I wanted one too. Tommaso's eyes closed, his tattooed arms wrapping around the small body with a tenderness that seemed at odds with everything Lucia knew about his capability for violence. When he opened them again, they were wet. Leo held back, watching the embrace with those analytical eyes. You hurt Mama, he said. You made her cry for a long time. I heard her at night when she thought we were sleeping. The words landed like blows, each one a fresh wound. Tommaso accepted them without flinching. I know, he said, and I will spend the rest of my life being sorry for that. But I promise you, Leo, I promise on everything I am, I will never hurt her again. I will never give her another reason to cry. How do I know you're telling the truth? You don't. Tommaso's honesty was brutal, unexpected. You won't know for a long time, maybe years. You'll have to watch me, test me, see if my actions match my words. That's the only way to know if someone means what they say. Leo considered this for a long moment. Then, with the gravity of a much older soul, he extended his hand. I'll be watching, he said. Tommaso took the small hand in his own, those tattooed fingers, Vita and Mort spelled across his knuckles, wrapping gently around Leo's palm. Life and death, the two absolutes that had governed his world for decades. But now there was a third family. I would expect nothing less, he said. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance of boundaries and breakthroughs. Tommaso came every day, always at the same time, always bringing something. Pastries for the boys, coffee for Lucia, small gifts that showed he'd been paying attention to what they liked. Matt warmed to him immediately, dragging him to the beach to help build elaborate sandcastles, chattering endlessly about dinosaurs and soccer and whether superheroes were real. Leo remained cautious, watching from the edges, testing Tommaso with pointed questions and deliberate challenges. He seemed to be cataloging every interaction, building a dossier of his father's character that he would eventually use to render judgment. Lucia watched it all with a mixture of terror and reluctant hope. She couldn't deny that Tommaso was trying. The man who'd once delegated all domestic matters to staff was now sitting cross-legged on her living room floor, letting Matt explain the complex hierarchy of dinosaur species, while Leo corrected factual inaccuracies with scholarly precision. The man who'd commanded armies and toppled rivals was now patiently learning the rules of a card game the boys had invented, losing gracefully when they changed the rules mid-play to ensure his defeat. He was also, she noticed with growing unease, making himself indispensable. The apartment that had once felt cozy now seemed cramped, especially when Tommaso's broad shoulders took up half the kitchen. The second-hand furniture looked shabby compared to his expensive clothes. The neighbors had started to whisper about the constant presence of well-dressed strangers in their quiet street. This isn't sustainable, she said one evening, after the boys had gone to bed, and they sat on opposite ends of her small couch like combatants negotiating a ceasefire. You can't keep coming here every day. People are talking. Let them talk. Easy for you to say. You'll leave eventually, go back to your life, and I'll be the one dealing with the consequences. Tommaso's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. Who said anything about leaving? You have an empire to run. Surely you can't manage it from a hotel room in Portugal indefinitely. I can manage it from anywhere. His voice was quiet, certain. I have people for the day-to-day operations. What I don't have, what I've never had, is a family. That requires my personal attention. We're not your family. The words came out harsher than she'd intended, and she watched him absorb them with that controlled stillness that had always unnerved her. The boys are my family, he said finally. That's not negotiable. And you? He paused, seeming to choose his next words carefully. You were going to be my wife, the mother of my children, my partner in everything I built. I threw that away with one night of stupidity and weakness, and I will regret it until I die. But that doesn't change what you are to me. And what am I to you? Everything. The word came out raw, unguarded. You are everything, Lucia. You have been since the day I met you, and you will be until I take my last breath. I know I have no right to say that. I know I forfeited any claim to your heart. But you asked, and I won't lie to you. Not anymore. Not ever again. She looked away, unable to meet the intensity of his gaze. Pretty words. You were always good with words. I'm not asking you to believe me yet. I'm asking you to let me prove it. How? By throwing money at our problems? By having your soldiers follow us everywhere? By showing up with pastries and pretending we're a normal family? By whatever it takes. He leaned forward, and despite herself, she found her body responding to his proximity. That old, familiar pull she tried so hard to overcome. Tell me what you need. Tell me what would help you trust me again. Name your conditions, Lucia. I'll meet every one of them. There's nothing you can. Anything. His voice was fierce now, desperate. I'll leave the syndicate. I'll hand over everything to Marco. Disappear from that world entirely. I'll become whoever you need me to be. A shopkeeper, a fisherman, A goddamn librarian if that's what it takes. Just tell me what you want. She stared at him, trying to process the magnitude of what he was offering. The Silvestri Syndicate was his life's work. His identity. Everything he'd sacrificed and suffered and struggled for. And he was willing to throw it all away. For her? You don't mean that. I've never meant anything more. You would be miserable. Within a year, you'd resent me for taking everything from you. You wouldn't be taking anything. He reached for her hand, and she let him take it, too stunned to pull away. I would be choosing you, choosing them, choosing the life I should have fought for 5 years ago instead of letting my weakness destroy everything. His thumb traced circles on her palm, the calluses on his fingers rough against her skin. She remembered those hands. The way they'd mapped her body with reverent attention. The way they'd tangled in her hair while he whispered promises against her lips. The way they'd rested on another woman's skin while Lucia watched from the doorway of her own bedroom. She pulled her hand back. I can't do this. Lucia. I need time. She stood, putting distance between them, wrapping her arms around herself. I need to think without you here, without your presence overwhelming everything. Can you give me that? Can you give me space to figure out what I want? He rose slowly, his expression shuddering into that controlled mask she recognized from negotiations with dangerous men. How much time? I don't know. A week, maybe more. And the boys? She hesitated. The thought of separating them from Tommaso now, after they'd just begun to know him, felt cruel. But having him here every day was making it impossible for her to think clearly. You can see them, she said finally. But not here. Take them to the beach, to the park, wherever. Just give me some room to breathe. Tommaso nodded once, sharply. 1 week. I'll give you 1 week. After that, we need to talk about the future, practical things. Security arrangements. Where you'll live. How we'll handle. Custody. The word landed between them like a grenade. I wasn't going to say that. His voice was quiet, almost gentle. I would never try to take them from you, Lucia. I know what you've sacrificed to raise them. What I was going to say was, how we'll handle being parents together. Whether or not we're anything else. The qualification hurt more than it should have. Whether or not we're anything else. As if their relationship, everything they'd been to each other, could be reduced to co-parenting arrangements and custody schedules. But wasn't that what she wanted? A clean separation between his role as a father and any lingering romantic complications? Fine, she said. 1 week. Then we'll talk. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the frame. The tattoos on his forearm. Serpents wrapped around a sacred heart, dates that marked significant deaths, caught the light from the hallway. For what it's worth, he said without turning around. I know you don't trust me yet, but I will earn it. However long it takes, whatever I have to do, you will believe me again someday, Lucia. I swear it on our sons' lives. Then he was gone, leaving her alone with the echo of a promise she desperately wanted to believe. The week passed in a blur of conflicting emotions. Lucia threw herself into work, translating documents with a focus she hadn't possessed in months. She cleaned the apartment obsessively, reorganizing closets and scrubbing surfaces that were already spotless. She took long walks along the coast, watching the waves crash against ancient rocks and trying to sort through the chaos in her head. The boys came home from their outings with Tommaso full of excited chatter. He'd taken them to an aquarium in Lisbon, to a castle where they'd pretended to be knights, to a restaurant where the chef let them help make pizza in the kitchen. Matt was fully enchanted, already calling Tommaso Papa with easy affection. Leo remained more reserved, but even he had begun to thaw, asking questions about Tommaso's work, carefully edited for young ears, requesting stories about the family history, allowing physical affection in the form of brief hugs and the occasional hair ruffle. They were bonding. Despite everything, despite her fear and resentment and lingering pain, Lucia couldn't deny that this was good for them. They needed a father. They deserved a father who looked at them like they were the most precious things in the universe, who listened to their rambling stories with genuine interest, who had already memorized their favorite foods and their bedtime rituals and the particular way each of them needed to be comforted after nightmares. Tommaso was becoming that father. which made everything so much more complicated. On the 5th day of her self-imposed reflection period, Lucia was walking home from the market when she noticed a man watching her from across the street. He wasn't one of Tommaso's soldiers. She'd learned to recognize them by now, their particular blend of alertness and deliberate casualness. This man was different, sharper, more predatory. She quickened her pace. He followed. By the time she reached her building, her heart was pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. She fumbled with her keys, dropped them, bent to retrieve them, and felt a hand close around her arm. Mrs. Marquez. The voice was silk over steel, accented in a way that spoke of Calabria rather than Portugal. Don Calabrese sends his regards. And an invitation. Let go of me. That would be unwise. The grip on her arm tightened painfully. My Don is not a patient man. He's been waiting 5 years for Tommaso Silvestri to show weakness. And now that he's found it, I'm not his weakness. The man smiled. A cold, reptilian expression that made her stomach turn. Oh, but you are. You and those beautiful boys of yours. The Don would very much like to meet them. Perhaps we could arrange. The sentence ended in a grunt of pain as something solid connected with the man's skull. He crumpled, releasing Lucia's arm, and she stumbled backward to find Marco standing over the unconscious body with a metal pipe in his hand. Mrs. Verisi. His voice was calm, as if he'd just stepped out for coffee rather than assaulting a man in broad daylight. Are you injured? I know. I'm fine. How did you? Boss's orders. You're never alone. He produced a phone from his pocket and spoke rapid Italian into it, calling for cleanup. We need to move you. Now, it's not safe here anymore. But the boys, already being collected. There's a car waiting around the corner. Please, Mrs. Verisi. We don't have much time. Everything happened very fast after that. Lucia found herself bundled into a black SUV with tinted windows, Marco beside her and another guard in the front seat. Within minutes, Leo and Matt were being loaded in as well, confused and frightened but calmed by their mother's presence. The car moved through the narrow streets with practiced efficiency, heading away from the coastline, away from the life she'd built over 5 years. Running again. But this time she wasn't running alone. The safe house was a villa in the Portuguese countryside, hidden behind high walls and electronic gates that made Lucia think of prisons more than protection. Guards patrolled the perimeter, discreet but ever-present, and the interior was decorated with the impersonal luxury of a high-end hotel. Tommaso was waiting for them in the entrance hall. He looked different than she'd ever seen him, haggard, his usual immaculate composure cracked by visible fear. When the boys tumbled out of the car, he swept them both into his arms with a desperation that made Lucia's throat tighten. Grazie a Dio, he murmured into their hair. Thank God. Thank God. Papa, what's happening? Matt's voice was small, bewildered. Why did we have to leave? Why couldn't we bring our toys? Everything will be replaced, Tommaso promised. Better toys. Whatever you want. But right now, I need you and your brother to be brave. Okay? Can you do that for me? Leo, characteristically, had already figured out more than his father wanted him to know. Someone tried to hurt Mama. That man at the building. He grabbed her. Tommaso's expression went very still. He grabbed her. Marco hit him. Matt's voice had taken on an edge of excitement, the fear momentarily forgotten in the thrill of witnessed violence. With a big pipe. Like in the movies. Go inside, Tommaso said. His voice controlled in a way that made Lucia shiver. Mrs. Oliveira is here, we brought her too, so you'd have a familiar face. She'll get you set up in your rooms while I talk to your mother. The boys went reluctantly, casting backwards glances as they disappeared into the house. When they were gone, Tommaso turned to Lucia, and the mask finally cracked. He touched you. I'm fine. He put his hands on you. The words came out like ground glass. One of Calabrese's men put his hands on you in the street, in broad daylight, and if Marco hadn't been there, but he was there, because you sent him. That's not the point. His voice rose before he visibly wrestled it back under control. The tattoos on his neck, Famiglia, Honor, sang. stood out stark against his flushed skin as he fought to master himself. The point is they found you. They came for you. They would have taken you, Lucia. Taken you and used you to control me, and I would have given them anything, everything to get you back. That's exactly why this is dangerous. She stepped closer to him, matching his intensity with her own. Don't you see? As long as I'm connected to you, I'm a target. The boys are targets. We were safe before you found us. You were never safe. His hands gripped her shoulders, not painfully but with an urgency that bordered on desperation. You were hidden. There's a difference. And hiding only works until someone finds you. Today it was Calabrese. Tomorrow it could be someone else. Any of a dozen families who would love to have leverage over me. Then maybe you should let us go. The words tore out of her before she could stop them. Walk away. Pretend you never found us. If you're not connected to us, we stop being valuable. Lucia. His voice dropped to something raw and broken. Do you really think I could do that? Watch you disappear again. Spend another 5 years not knowing if you were alive or dead, safe or suffering. It's not about what you want. No. He cut her off, his grip on her shoulders tightening. It's not about what either of us wants. It's about those two boys in there and what's best for them. And whether you want to admit it or not, what's best for them is having both parents. Having protection. Having a father who would tear the world apart before he let anyone hurt them. She wanted to argue, wanted to push back against his logic, his intensity, his overwhelming presence that made it so hard to think clearly. But she couldn't find the words, because underneath all her fear and resentment, she knew he was right. Running hadn't kept them safe. It had only delayed the inevitable. What do you want me to do? She asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Come home. His hands moved from her shoulders to cup her face, the touch achingly gentle. Come back to Rome with me, not as my prisoner, never that, as the mother of my children, as a protected member of my household. And maybe, if you can ever forgive me. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his palms against her cheeks, the calluses on his fingers rough against her skin. 5 years of running, 5 years of hiding, 5 years of raising 2 children alone, always looking over her shoulder, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. She was so tired. If I come back, she said quietly, her eyes still closed, things will be different. I won't be your fiancé. I won't be your lover. I'll be the mother of your children. Nothing more. You don't get to touch me like this. You don't get to look at me like you're looking at me right now. You earn back my trust first. You prove yourself first. And if you can't accept those conditions, I accept them. Her eyes flew open. Just like that. Just like that. His thumbs traced gentle arcs across her cheekbones, contradicting the distance she was trying to establish. I told you, Lucia, I'll be whatever you need me to be. Co-parent. A protector. A stranger who happens to share your children. If that's all you can offer me right now, I'll take it. And I'll spend every day earning the right to be more. She should have pulled away. Should have established physical boundaries to match the emotional ones she was trying to maintain. But his touch felt like coming home after a long, exhausting journey. And she found herself leaning into his palms instead of retreating from them. I'm scared, she admitted, the vulnerability in her voice surprising them both. I'm scared of being hurt again. I'm scared of what will happen to the boys if they grow up in your world. I'm scared of what it will do to me to be near you every day, wanting something I can't let myself have. I'm scared too. His confession matched hers in intensity. I'm scared of failing you again, of disappointing them, of being the kind of father my father was, distant, cold, more interested in business than in love. I'm scared of loving you so much that I lose myself entirely, and you still never forgive me. Maybe we should be scared together. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and she watched his face transform, hope flickering in his dark eyes like a candle flame in a windstorm. Is that what you want? I don't know what I want. She finally stepped back, breaking the contact that was making it impossible to think clearly. But I know I'm tired of running, and I know my sons deserve to know their father. And I know. She took a breath, steadying herself. I know that despite everything, some stupid part of me never stopped loving you. Even when I hated you. Even when I wanted to. So maybe we should try being scared together. And see what happens. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't trust. It wasn't the reunion Tommaso had dreamed of through 5 years of desperate searching. But it was a beginning. And sometimes a beginning was enough. They returned to Rome 3 days later. The Silvestri estate looked exactly as Lucia remembered. Imposing gates, fountain in the courtyard, portraits of dangerous ancestors lining the hallways. But it felt different now. Smaller, somehow. Less intimidating. Or maybe she was different. Her 5 years of independence having stripped away the awe she'd once felt in the presence of such concentrated wealth and power. The boys were enchanted by everything. The size of the rooms, the swimming pool behind the house, the kitchen where staff prepared whatever they requested. Matt immediately declared it the best house in the world, and began planning elaborate adventures through its endless corridors. Leo was more circumspect, exploring with careful attention, mapping exits and hiding spots with an instinct that made Lucia uneasy. Her son was preparing for danger, preparing to run if necessary. He'd learned that from her. Tommaso had kept his word about giving her space. She had a suite of rooms on the opposite side of the estate from his, with a connecting door to the boys' rooms and a private entrance that allowed her to come and go without encountering him. He appeared for meals and family time, carefully scheduled windows where they practiced being parents together, but otherwise maintained a respectful distance. It was exactly what she'd asked for. It was also slowly driving her insane. She watched him with the boys, this man she'd loved so completely and lost so devastatingly, and saw someone she barely recognized. The cold, controlled mafia boss she'd known before. The one who'd kept emotion locked away behind impenetrable walls, had been replaced by a father who got down on his knees to examine caterpillars, who read bedtime stories in different voices until the boys collapsed in giggles, who carried them on his shoulders through the estate's gardens and let them ride him like a horse until all 3 of them were breathless with laughter. He was becoming the father she'd always believed he could be. And despite her best efforts to maintain emotional distance, she found herself falling for him all over again. It happened in small moments, catching her off guard. The way he looked at her across the breakfast table, his eyes soft with an affection he quickly masked. The way his hand brushed hers when they both reached for the same toy to put away, sending electricity shooting through her nerve endings. The way he said her name, Lucia, with a reverence that made it sound like a prayer. 3 months after their return to Rome, on a warm autumn evening, she found him alone on the terrace where he'd once kissed her for the first time. "The boys are asleep," she said, joining him at the railing. Matt wanted 3 stories tonight. Leo wanted to discuss the ethical implications of space colonization. "He gets that from you." A small smile played at the corner of his mouth. "That need to understand the moral dimensions of everything. He gets his stubbornness from you." "Fair enough." He turned to face her, and the fading sunlight caught the tattoos on his neck, the ink gleaming against his olive skin. "How are you settling in? Is there anything you need?" "I have everything I need." "That's not what I asked." She considered the question, really considered it for the first time since their return. I need to stop being afraid." "Afraid of what?" "You. This. What it means to let myself feel something for you again." She gripped the terrace railing, her knuckles whitening. "You know what's ironic? I spent 5 years running from you, and I thought that was the hard part. But this, being here, being close to you, remembering why I fell in love with you in the first place. This is so much harder." "Lucia, let me finish." She held up a hand, stopping him. "I need to say this. I've been holding it in for months, and if I don't say it now, I never will." He waited, his expression carefully neutral, though she could see the hope burning beneath the surface. "I loved you," she said quietly, "more than I've ever loved anyone. And when I saw you with Valentina, when I understood what you'd done, it destroyed me. Not just my heart, my entire sense of self. Everything I thought I knew about you, about us, about my own judgment. All of it crumbled in that moment. And I've spent 5 years rebuilding. Becoming someone who doesn't need you. Someone who can survive on her own. Raise children on her own. Face whatever comes without depending on anyone. She took a breath, steadying herself for what came next. But here's the thing I've realized since coming back. That independence, that self-sufficiency, it's not the same as healing. I can function without you. I can survive without you. But I can't. I can't seem to stop wanting you. And I'm so tired of fighting it. His sharp intake of breath was almost inaudible. What are you saying? I'm saying I don't know how to forgive you yet. I don't know if I ever fully will. But I'm tired of punishing both of us for something we can't change. She finally met his eyes, and what she saw there made her chest ache. So maybe we should stop pretending we're just co-parents. Maybe we should actually try being something more. Slowly, carefully, with the understanding that you're still earning my trust, and I reserve the right to walk away if you ever. He kissed her, not the explosive, passionate kisses of their past, but something gentler, reverent. His lips brushed hers with a tenderness that brought tears to her eyes, his hands cupping her face like she was made of glass. Every day, he murmured against her mouth. For the rest of my life I will earn this. I will prove to you that I am worthy of the second chance you're giving me. I will never betray you again, Lucia. Never. I swear it on our children's lives. I swear it on everything I am. She believed him, and for the first time in 5 years, she let herself kiss him back. The months that followed were a slow reconstruction of everything they'd lost. There were setbacks, moments when old wounds reopened and trust felt impossibly fragile. Lucia sometimes woke from nightmares of that bedroom door, Valentina's triumphant smile, and couldn't let Tommaso touch her for days afterward. He bore these retreats with patient acceptance, never pushing, never demanding, simply waiting until she was ready to try again. But there were also breakthroughs. The first time she reached for his hand in public, initiating contact rather than receiving it. The first time she fell asleep in his arms, trusting him enough to be vulnerable. The first time she said, "I love you," again. The words torn from somewhere deep in her chest, and watched him break down in tears. "I don't deserve you," he gasped, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I will never deserve you." "Maybe not," she agreed, wiping the tears from his cheeks with gentle thumbs. "But I want you anyway. Isn't that what love is? Choosing someone despite everything." The boys flourished in the environment of stability and security. Matt's exuberance found outlets in the estate's extensive grounds, where he climbed trees and built forts and conducted elaborate adventures with the patience of household staff who'd been sternly instructed to indulge his every whim. Leo's quiet intelligence was nurtured by private tutors who challenged him academically while respecting his introverted nature. And both of them gradually came to understand exactly what their father was. It happened by accident or perhaps by inevitability. Leo, ever observant, began noticing things. The guards who followed at a distance. The weapons concealed beneath expensive jackets. The men who came to the estate at all hours, speaking in hushed voices about shipments and territory and problems that needed handling. "Papa is in charge of something dangerous, isn't he?" he asked one evening, his voice matter-of-fact. He was 7 now, sharp as a blade and twice as observant. "Something outside the regular rules." Tommaso exchanged a glance with Lucia before kneeling to meet his son's eyes. "Yes," he said simply. "I am." "Is it bad?" The question was loaded with moral complexity that no 7-year-old should have to navigate. Tommaso took his time answering. "Some of it is," he admitted. "Some of what I do hurts people. But I try to hurt only people who have hurt others first. And I try to protect the people who work for me, and my family, and the things I've built." He paused. "Does that make me a bad person?" Leo considered this with the seriousness he brought to everything. "I don't know," he finally said. "I think maybe people aren't just good or bad. I think maybe they're both at different times." "That's very wise. Mama says that. She says nobody's perfect, and what matters is trying to be better." Tommaso's eyes found Lucia across the room, and what she saw in them made her heart clench with emotion. "Your mama," he said quietly, "is the wisest person I've ever known." A year after their return to Rome, Tommaso took Lucia back to the terrace where everything had begun, and where everything was about to change again. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The boys were inside with their tutors, their laughter drifting through open windows. And Tommaso was kneeling before her, holding a ring that sparkled in the fading light. "I know I did this wrong the first time," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I made promises I didn't keep. I asked you to build a life with me and then I destroyed it. But I'm not the same man I was 5 years ago. You made me better, Lucia. You and our sons made me someone worth loving." She stared at the ring, different from the first one, she noticed. Simpler, more elegant, like he'd actually thought about what she would want, rather than what would impress. "What about your world?" she asked quietly. "The syndicate, the danger, everything you've built. Can I really be a part of that? Can our sons? That's what I want to talk to you about." He set the ring box aside and took her hands in his. "I've been making arrangements, transitioning leadership to Marco, restructuring the organization so it can run without my daily involvement. I'm not leaving entirely, that would create a power vacuum that could put us all at risk. But I'm stepping back, becoming more of an advisor than a boss." "You would do that? Give up everything you've worked for?" "I already gave up everything that mattered when I lost you." His grip on her hands tightened. "The syndicate, the power, the money. None of it means anything without you. Without them. I learned that the hard way, over 5 years of having everything and feeling completely empty." "Tommaso, marry me." His voice cracked on the words. "Not because you have to. Not because it makes sense for the children. But because you love me, and I love you. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving that I can be the man you deserve." She looked at him, really looked, and saw everything she'd ever wanted. The powerful man who would move mountains for his family. The tender father who read bedtime stories in funny voices. The wounded soul who'd spent 5 years trying to atone for one devastating mistake. She saw the man she loved. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." His face transformed. Joy and relief and overwhelming love breaking through every carefully constructed wall. He surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, spinning her as she laughed with a freedom she hadn't felt in years. "I love you," he breathed against her hair. "God, Lucia, I love you so much. I love you too." The words came easily now, without fear or reservation. "I never really stopped." From inside the house, 2 small faces appeared at the window. Matt's whoop of excitement was audible even through the glass, and Leo's quiet smile said everything his brother's exuberance couldn't. Their family was finally complete. The wedding took place on a spring morning, in the garden of the estate where Lucia had once dreamed of a future that seemed impossibly lost. She wore a simple dress, cream silk that caught the sunlight, her hair twisted up with small white flowers, and walked down an aisle flanked by roses toward the man who waited at the altar with tears already tracking down his face. The boys stood beside him, Matt practically vibrating with excitement, Leo solemn and proud in his miniature suit. Behind them, a small gathering of witnesses, Marco and his wife, a few trusted members of the organization, the elderly woman from Barcelona who'd taken in a pregnant stranger and never asked for anything in return. Valentina was not invited. Her name had not been spoken in the Silvestri household since Lucia's return, and word had spread through the underworld that any mention of her would be considered a personal insult to the boss. She'd disappeared into obscurity somewhere, her ambitions thoroughly thwarted, her betrayal a footnote in a story that no longer belonged to her. Lucia didn't think about her at all. The ceremony was brief. Simple vows, simple rings, a kiss that started gentle and deepened into a promise. When they turned to face their guests as husband and wife, Matt launched himself at them with characteristic abandon, and Leo followed more carefully, allowing himself to be pulled into a family embrace that felt like everything coming together at last. "We're really a family now," Matt announced with satisfaction. "A forever family." "We were always a family," Leo corrected gently. "But now it's official." Tommaso looked at his wife, over the heads of their children, and what she saw in his eyes was not the cold control of a mafia boss or the desperate intensity of a man trying to earn forgiveness. It was peace, pure, uncomplicated peace. "I love you," he mouthed silently. "I know," she mouthed back. "I love you too." The years that followed were not perfect, no life ever is. There were challenges and arguments and moments when old wounds threatened to resurface. Tommaso's transition away from active leadership was slower and more complicated than either of them had hoped. The Calabrese family made one final attempt at retaliation that resulted in 2 weeks of lockdown and a firefight that left 3 of Tommaso's men injured. But through it all, they faced things together. The twins grew into remarkable young men. Leo following his analytical nature into law, eventually becoming a prosecutor who specialized in bringing down the kind of organizations his father had once commanded. Matt embracing the family business with a reformer's zeal, determined to transform it into something legitimate over time. Neither of them ever forgot the lessons their parents had taught them. That love required work, that forgiveness was a process rather than an event, and that family was something you built through presence and attention and unwavering commitment. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Tommaso took Lucia back to the terrace where he'd proposed twice, once in arrogance, once in humility. "Any regrets?" he asked, his arm around her waist as they watched the sun set over the city that had seen all their joy and heartbreak. "About what?" "Coming back. Giving me another chance. Building a life with a man who nearly destroyed you." She considered the question, as she always did when he asked variations of it, which was often even after all these years. Part of him, she knew, still couldn't quite believe she'd stayed, still expected her to wake up one morning and realize she'd made a terrible mistake. "I have one regret," she said finally, and felt him tense beside her. "What?" "That I didn't let you find me sooner." She turned in his arms, her hands flat against his chest where his heart beat steady beneath the fabric of his shirt. "All those years of running, of hiding, of being scared and alone. I thought I was protecting myself. But really I was just postponing this. Everything we've built together. You weren't ready. Maybe not. But I wish I had been." She stretched up to kiss him, gentle and lingering. "Because every moment I spent without you, I was only half alive. And every moment since I came back has been worth all the pain that came before." His arms tightened around her, his face buried in her hair, his breath warm against her temple. "I don't deserve you," he murmured. The same words he'd spoken 1,000 times over 15 years, still raw with wonder. "Maybe not," she agreed, the same response she always gave. "But I want you anyway." And as the sun set over Rome, casting golden light across 2 people who'd lost everything and found their way back to each other, Lucia Silvestri realized something she'd been too afraid to fully accept. This was not a second chance. This was not a compromise or a settlement or making the best of a broken situation. This was exactly where she was always meant to be, in his arms, in their home, surrounded by the family they'd created together. This was love. Imperfect and hard-won and stronger for everything it had survived. And it was forever. The end. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more emotional journeys of love, betrayal, and redemption.